this video is to help students with exam technique, especially when looking at the Cold War. So I'm looking at question 2 from the Conflict and Tension 1945 to 1972 topic that's from paper 1 of the AQA spec. It asks students to judge the usefulness of two sources. Let's have a look at that question.
How useful are sources B and C to a historian studying the reasons for the Prague Spring? Explain your answer using sources B and C and your contextual knowledge.
Now, when revising, you should be doing practice questions like this. And when you practice source-based questions, take a few minutes to unpack each source first before writing your response. Let's have a go at unpacking source B.
Dubček is depicted as Oliver Twist, a weak, undernourished child asking for more food, symbolising the request for greater political freedom and reform during the Prague Spring. Dubček isn't asking for luxury, just basic freedoms, which were seen as too much by the Soviets. Brezhnev is shown as Mr. Bumble, and as you can see, he looks horrified. This represents the Soviet Union's refusal of such reforms. It is mocking the Soviets' reaction by exaggerating Brezhnev's horror at such modest requests, implying that the USSR was oppressive and intolerant of any change. We can see it's a British cartoon. It is satire and an exaggeration which helps a historian understand public perception and criticism of Soviet control at the time. It was during the actual events of the Prague Spring, making it a contemporary source or a primary source. It's good for showing immediate reactions. However, if we're going to highlight the limitations to the source, we might say that we only get a Western view rather than those from the Eastern Bloc who are actually directly affected by the Soviet Union.
Now let's have a look at source C.
It's from a speech given by Ludvík Vašílek, who was a leading figure in the reform movement in Czechoslovakia in March 1968. He says, "In Czechoslovakia in 20 years, not one single human problem has been solved. From primary needs like flats and schools to more subtle needs such as fulfilling oneself, the need for people to trust one another, or the development of education. The people who are trusted by the communist government are the obedient ones, who do not cause any trouble, who do not ask questions. The unexceptional man comes off best." So we start to unpack this source. We get an idea on why there was unrest in Czechoslovakia. Not even the basic needs like housing, education were being met. It highlights the lack of freedom and progress. It suggests that under communism, being average and silent is safer than being talented or outspoken. The government only trusts obedient people, those who do not challenge authority or do not stand out. We could say that this source is limited because we do not get a complete picture of public opinion, nor do we get the international reaction. We just get the view of an insider from the Czechoslovakian reform movement. So if we consider how we're going to structure our answer, a 12 marker should be 3 paragraphs. In paragraph 1, we should discuss the first source that we looked at. We should analyse and evaluate its content, so in this case it would have been the cartoon, and the provenance, which tells us where it comes from, who made it, and when. We also need to apply our own contextual knowledge. We then do the same for source C in paragraph 2. Your third paragraph should be your conclusion, your overall judgment. In this paragraph, you might even want to decide if one source is more useful than the other, although you don't have to evaluate it this way.
Now I managed to get hold of the first paragraph of a top level 4 answer, which looks at one of the sources, in this case source B. Let's have a quick look at a first paragraph of a top level 4 answer.
Source B is useful as it shows how Dubček's reforms during the Prague Spring were viewed as a threat to Soviet control. The cartoon shows Dubček as Oliver Twist holding out a bowl labelled Czech reforms. This suggests that he was asking for basic freedoms such as free speech and economic reforms. Brezhnev is drawn as Mr. Bumble and looks horrified. This implies that the Soviet Union was unwilling to give the most basic freedoms to the Czechoslovakian people. This is supported by my own knowledge that Brezhnev feared Dubček's reforms would spread across Eastern Europe and weaken the Warsaw Pact. The source is a British cartoon from 1968, showing how the West criticised the USSR's harsh response. However, it might be limited for understanding the reasons behind the Prague Spring from the Czech or Soviet perspective. A Western perspective could be seen as one-sided, as it is more likely to mock the USSR rather than explain Soviet motives.
Now, if we look closely at that paragraph, we will see what the examiner expects for a level 4 answer.
So I've highlighted in blue where the student has evaluated the source. They've said how useful it is and also towards the end discussed its limitations. In red, we see the analysis. We see where the student has given a commentary of what they can see in the source, both in the content but also later on in the provenance, the fact that it's a British cartoon from 1968. In green, we see some explanation on what the student thinks the message of the source might be. And in purple, we've got some contextual knowledge to support this.
If you are using this video as a revision resource, then please feel free to do your own paragraph 2 on source C, do your own conclusion, which should give an overall judgment on both sources. As I say, you can either rank one source as being more useful than the other. That could be a good way of evaluating, but you don't have to do it that way. I hope you have found this video helpful. If so, then please feel free to give it a like, please feel free to subscribe and leave a kind comment, and I hope to make another video for you soon.